My name is Leslie, and even though I'm 32 now, I still sometimes find myself living with the same hopes and wounds I did as a teenager, when I thought family was an unshakable fortress to which I could return at any moment and where they would always accept me without conditions or reservations. Honestly, I never thought that my own blood, the very people I protected and was ready to fight for, would one day turn their backs on me. But here I am, with an emptiness in my chest and memories that still burn in my heart. I grew up with my parents and my younger sister, Harper. Declarations of love or words of support were rare in our home, but as the eldest, I always felt a responsibility to lead by example, at least outwardly. Harper and I were never particularly close as children, and back then I thought it was normal for each sister to have her own life and her own territory. But over the years, I realized there had never been friendship or trust between us, only envy, resentment, and a constant battle for my parents' attention. She envied everything: my academic success, my friends, even the dresses they bought me for holidays. I remember how she'd throw tantrums if everyone's eyes were suddenly on me, and my parents would just shake their heads condescendingly and say, "Oh, Leslie, she's the youngest. She's entitled to be capricious." After college, I rose through the ranks, found a job in marketing, and working tirelessly, was finally able to afford my own place. Even though it was just a 2-bedroom apartment with a steep mortgage, for me it was a symbol of freedom and proof that I could take care of myself. The apartment was in a quiet neighborhood with easy access to everything, and every time I returned home, I felt the same pride that had kept me up all night slaving over reports and projects. My parents, on the other hand, were still struggling to make ends meet, renting a tiny studio apartment on the outskirts of town. It was always dark, damp, and stuffy. The windows barely let in any light. The walls felt like paper, and the neighborhood was downright terrifying. Every visit became an ordeal. I felt pain and shame seeing my mom and dad living in these conditions, but I couldn't do more than help with small things. And just when it seemed like life was slowly getting back on track, Jake showed up. He worked alongside me, smart, funny, collected, a good listener, and a joker who made even the darkest days suddenly seem brighter. We dated for 8 months, and I was sure it was the beginning of something real. But with Jake's arrival, Harper seemed to smell someone else's happiness. She started showing up everywhere we hung out, dressed up like she was going to a party, laughing too loudly at his every remark, as if trying to prove to everyone around her that she was better than me. She'd message him under the guise of family matters, asking for help with the most trivial things, and once even showed up at his office during lunch break, claiming she was just passing by. When I tried to talk to her about it, she'd widen her eyes and mockingly reply, "What, I can't be friendly with your boyfriend?" Jesus, Leslie, you're so paranoid. But I knew better. That wasn't friendliness, that was praying. The worst part was that Jake seemed oblivious or unwilling to her intentions. He'd smile and assure me that Harper was just trying to be nice and that I was overreacting. I wanted to believe him, to cuddle with him and forget everything, but my heart told me otherwise. My sister was following in my footsteps again, only this time the target wasn't an outfit or a friend, but the man I loved. It all ended on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. I was sitting at my desk when my phone vibrated. A message from Harper. "Hey sis, I wanted to let you know that Jake and I are now together. Please don't interfere with our happiness." I reread the words over and over as if trying to find a mistake, but the letters were crystal clear. My hands were shaking, and I immediately dialed Jake, but he didn't answer. And then another message arrived. From him. "It's true. I'm with your sister now." At that moment, the world collapsed. I locked myself in the bathroom of the office building, buried my face in my hands, and cried, unable to stop. The tears weren't just for him, although the pain of my beloved's betrayal burned to the point of numbness. They were about her, about the sister who, knowing how much he meant to me, deliberately did everything to take him away and ultimately achieved her goal. When I finally managed to piece myself together and begin to function at all, rumors began to reach me that once again made my heart clench and my breath catch. Mutual friends, those who had seen more from the outside than I could see myself, began to say that Harper had been literally stalking Jake for months, like some kind of prey hunter with no other goal than to subjugate someone else's happiness. She memorized his schedule, knew which cafe he drank his morning latte at, which gym he went to in the evening, and every time, completely by chance, she would show up nearby as if fate itself were pushing them to meet. But I knew this wasn't fate. It was cold calculation and a painful desire to prove to me that she could take away even what was sacred to me. The betrayal hit me so hard that I couldn't stand being in that city anymore. Every street corner reminded me of Jake. Every cafe sign brought back evenings when we'd sit at a table and laugh. Every street became a ghost of something that would never return. I couldn't pass by the restaurants where he'd held my hand and the coffee shops where, as I now imagined, Harper cornered him, playing her eternal game of rivalry. I wanted to disappear, to move so far away that not a single corner of this city would remind me of everything I'd lost. And then fate threw me a lifeline. My company had been urging me to transfer to another state for months. They were offering more money, a higher position, new prospects, and suddenly it all began to seem not just a career opportunity, but a real way out, a chance to escape this swamp of memories. That same day, I called my boss and firmly said, "Yes, I agree." For 2 weeks, I lived in boxes, sorted through my things, threw out old photographs and letters, as if cleansing myself of the past, and finally moved to the other side of the country. I rented a small apartment, not luxurious, but clean and fresh, with windows that let in sunlight every morning, and the feeling of newness and freedom was so overwhelming that for several days I couldn't believe it was all real. My parents were shocked by my decision. When Mom learned about the move, she simply asked, confused, "But honey, what about Jake? You could have discussed it. Maybe you still have a chance?" I sighed and answered firmly, painfully, but without hesitation. "Mom, Harper stole my boyfriend. There's nothing to resolve." And for the first time, I felt a rift develop between us. Mom was still trying to play peacemaker, smoothing over the rough edges, as if nothing terrible had happened. Dad was the only one who said exactly what I was longing to hear. "Leslie, I don't approve of what Harper did. It was wrong. She's gone too far." At that moment, I thanked God that at least one person in my family saw things for what they were and didn't try to minimize my pain. The new city was like a breath of fresh air. It was warmer, cleaner. The streets were full of smiles, and people knew nothing about my past. I threw myself into work, and gradually new friends, new places, new habits emerged. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again without pain. But somewhere in the background, an alarm bell rang. I still had that same apartment back home, and the mortgage was still there. At first, I thought about selling it. The market was favorable, and maybe I would even make a profit. But then I thought again of my parents, their tiny studio apartment, the gray walls, and the endless weariness in their eyes when I visited. They were getting older, and it became clear to me that this was my chance to help them the way I should have long ago. I called and suggested, "Look, I'm staying here for a long time. Why don't you move into my apartment? It's spacious, bright, and much better than where you're stuck. You'll live in a decent neighborhood, close to work, and please don't argue. I'll continue to pay the mortgage and taxes, and you'll only be left with the utilities. Let's think of this as helping each other." I heard Mom sob into the phone. "Leslie, honey, we can't do this. It's too much." But I insisted, "Mom, this is perfect for all of us." "This is my decision," Dad agreed almost immediately, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders when we agreed. A month later, they moved in, and for the first time in a long time, I felt proud that I had done something truly right, something that had benefited those who had always been there, despite all my mistakes and despite Harper. My plan back then seemed crystal clear and fair to everyone. I was going to pay off the mortgage as quickly as possible, while continuing to save money to one day buy a place in my new city. Everyone was winning in this scheme. My parents were getting rid of their miserable studio apartment. I was solving my apartment problem, and I was gaining the time and space to start anew. 6 months passed, and I truly began to feel life returning to me, as if spring had finally arrived after a long, agonizing winter. Work was booming. My colleagues had become not just coworkers, but friends with whom I shared the joys and small discoveries of the new city. And, most importantly, the names Harper and Jake popped into my head less and less. They seemed to have vanished, losing their hold on my heart. One evening, lying on the couch and idly scrolling through my newsfeed, I came across a small notification. My cousin Lisa had liked a photo of Harper. I hadn't visited her page in a while. Honestly, I'd even forgotten I was subscribed to her updates. But curiosity got the better of me at that moment, and I clicked the link. My phone screen blinded me with a picture that made my heart sink. Harper was standing in the kitchen, and it wasn't just any kitchen, it was my kitchen, with granite countertops I'd spent hours choosing, a backsplash I'd hand-applied, and all the little touches that made the apartment my home. She posed with some silly coffee set, looking contented and cozy, as if she'd always lived there. But even more terrifying was the caption, "A huge thank you to my parents for giving me this apartment." My amazing fiancé and I finally have our own home. Housewarming soon. I read it 3 times, as if my brain refused to process the meaning. What the hell was a gifted apartment? This was my home, my blood and sweat, my sleepless nights spent paying off the mortgage. My hands shook as I scrolled through her new posts. Each photo hit me like a slap. Harper and Jake in my kitchen, Harper and Jake on my couch watching TV, Harper and Jake in my bedroom, in my bed, and to top it all off. In one photo, I clearly saw her dress hanging in my closet. It felt like she was erasing me from my own home, turning everything I loved into a backdrop for her happy life. And then it got worse. Photos of my parents with them started flashing across my feed. I saw my dad grilling meat in the backyard of my apartment complex, my mom with a glass of wine, and Harper and Jake nearby laughing like one big happy family. In another photo, they were sitting at a restaurant table, and Harper's caption sounded like a mockery. "Family dinner with my wonderful parents." But the last post literally broke me. It was their weekend trip to the mountains, and under the photo, Harper wrote, "So grateful to my parents for their promise to always support me. Family is everything." I read those words and felt a black emptiness growing inside me. Where was this support for me? Where were those words when I was sobbing in the bathroom and packing my things, running from the betrayal? I kept scrolling, hoping to see some proof that my parents were actually living in my apartment, as we'd agreed. But every photo suggested otherwise. They were just guests, dropping in on Harper and Jake as if they were invited, not the hosts. And when I went to my mom's Facebook page, it completely floored me. There was a photo of her and my dad in some new rented apartment, shabby with peeling walls. It looked even worse than their old studio. The post was dated just 2 weeks ago, and then the picture came together. I'd given them a chance to escape, a chance at a normal life in my bright 2-bedroom apartment. I'd given them the best of me, and they'd given it to Harper and her fiancé, and they'd driven themselves back into this hole. I was shaking with anger, but I knew that in all this turmoil of emotions, I needed to keep a cool head and follow a plan, because crying and screaming wouldn't fix anything, and I had the documents, and I had the truth on my side. I continued to dig through Harper's posts, scrolling through her photos and comments, and then, among the warm responses and silly emojis, I came across a message from my cousin Lisa, who had asked in a friendly way about the housewarming party, and Harper casually replied, "This Saturday at 7. Can't wait to show everyone our new place." And I looked away from the screen, feeling my knees buckle. That Saturday was in 4 days, and suddenly I had the perfect plan, one that required decisiveness, speed, and a one-way ticket, because I wasn't going to negotiate with anyone or ask permission to return home, as it was now inhabited by those who had betrayed me. The next morning I called my boss and said, with a shaky voice but a steely determination, "I need a week off for family reasons." Predictably, no one asked for details or explanations, because corporate life is so structured that personal dramas are often hidden behind closed doors, and that worked to my advantage. Then, without wasting any time, I booked the most expensive plane ticket I'd ever bought in my life. After all, spontaneity is expensive when you're rushing to reclaim what's rightfully yours. And, clutching my bag, I stuffed it with the most important papers: the apartment title, the mortgage deeds, the latest payment slips, a complete set of documents that could suddenly put an end to any brazen claim, because I knew it was better to have the paperwork than to rely on someone's vague sense of obligation. I didn't tell anyone I was coming, not my parents, not Harper, not Jake, because I wanted it to be a complete surprise, to avoid giving them time to stage a spectacle and manipulate the circumstances. I imagined Harper's face at her little party, where she was already decorating my walls with smiling photos of herself, and this imagination fueled my resolve, because she thought she'd won, thought she'd stolen both my man and my home, and all I had left to do was show her that actions have consequences, and that kindness can be turned into betrayal. But that doesn't mean you can pay it back with impunity. The flight stretched on forever, every minute in the sky filled with both anticipation and dread. I imagined people I didn't want to see laughing in my house on Saturday night, and I thought about the legal minutiae I'd studied the night before moving out: tenant rights and eviction procedures in case I had to resort to formal action, because who knows what those who so easily overstepped my boundaries are capable of. I landed on Friday night, rented a room in a small hotel near the old neighborhood, laid out all the documents in front of me, checked them off: the title deed, the mortgage receipts, the banal but oh so important papers, and fell asleep almost without sleep, because in the morning I would have to transform myself into the woman I once was and the woman I was destined to become again: collected, confident, and ready to stand my ground. On Saturday, I wore my best dress not out of vanity, but to look exactly like that: the successful, reserved woman I had become. I wanted every stranger in the room I walked into to see not a hysterical, broken girl, but a person who couldn't be ignored. And as I called an Uber and drove home, my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would jump out of my chest, because part of me was afraid of the coming confrontation, and part of me was burning with rage for every injustice committed against me. When I approached my apartment door, music and voices echoed through the stairwell. The smell of fried food and champagne drifted through the crack in the doorway. Cars were parked along the street, and people stood at the entrance as if they were celebrating someone else's life. Harper had truly gone all out, throwing a housewarming party in my apartment, and I took a deep breath, knocked, and a minute later the door swung open, revealing her face, stunned, pale, but with an almost shameless smile, and she whispered first, "What the hell are you doing here?" And then, as if feigning surprise and sweetness, she said with a hint of mockery, "Hello to you too, sis. You threw a great party in my apartment." And at that moment, the music inside stopped for a second. The guests fell silent and questions rang out. "Who is that? Who is she?" Harper tried to block the entrance, but I stuck my foot in the doorway and without looking away said in an even voice, "We need to talk," because it was impossible to remain silent any longer. Squeezing inside, I encountered a scene that seemed surreal. There were at least 20 people there, relatives I hadn't seen in years, several of Harper's friends, and even a few people I didn't know at all. Everyone was standing with glasses in their hands, laughing, discussing trivial matters, and simultaneously exchanging excited glances, as if they were not in my apartment, but in some designer showroom that Harper had just opened, and they called it her new place, her beginning in life. But when I walked in, the noise began to fade, and I looked around. The apartment felt foreign, the walls repainted in colors I would never have chosen, the furniture rearranged as if to erase every reminder of me, and on every wall hung photographs of Harper and Jake, smiling from their frames as if they were trying to anchor themselves in these walls forever, erasing every evidence that I had lived here, that this was my home, built by my hands and my labor. And then, in the sudden silence, I heard my mother's voice. It wavered, and she, standing near the kitchen next to my father, looked as if a truck's headlights had been pointed at her, and the first thing she said was, "What are you doing here?" I straightened up and, trying to keep my voice steady even though my heart was pounding, said, "I'm here because this is my apartment, and apparently no one saw fit to tell me my sister is throwing a housewarming party here." Harper stepped forward, a desperate need to regain control in her movement, and her voice was sharp, with studied superiority. "You weren't invited, Leslie. This is my party, in my apartment, and I want you to leave immediately." The words echoed, and I noticed some of the relatives start exchanging glances, as if they finally realized something was wrong, that there was a catch to this story, and a whisper, like a gentle breeze, began to ripple through the room. I chuckled, but it was a humorless laugh, bitter and prickly. "Your apartment? Harper, this was never your apartment. This is my apartment, and the name on the title deed is mine, and the mortgage is in my name, which I continue to pay every month, no matter what." Mom rushed toward me in a panic, her eyes darting around, her voice breaking. "Leslie, please don't make a scene. Just listen to Harper and leave, okay? We gave this apartment to her and Jake. We gave it to her." I froze, staring at my mother, not believing my ears, and slowly, almost enunciating each word, I said, "Mom, you didn't give anything to anyone. This isn't your apartment to control. I let you and Dad live here out of kindness, to help you get out of your cramped studio, but that never made you the owners." My father, standing slightly to the side, interjected, his voice quieter than usual, as if he wasn't sure what he was saying. "But honey, you said we could have it. You gave us the keys and everything." I stepped closer, and looking him straight in the eye, replied, "I gave you the keys so you could live here, not so you could give them to Harper. There's a huge difference between letting someone live here and giving them away as a gift, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars." By this point, the guests were no longer trying to hide their curiosity. Everyone was openly staring, some were chatting, and several were awkwardly gathering their coats, clearly realizing they were caught in the middle of someone else's family drama. Harper's face flushed, and she practically screamed, "Leslie, you're ruining my party. Mom and Dad decided to give this apartment to me because you abandoned it anyway. You don't even live in this state anymore." I spun around to face her. "I didn't give up anything. I moved for work, and out of kindness, I let my parents live here, and now I find out you and Jake have moved in instead." I glanced around the room, and the words came out of my mouth. "Yes, that's right. Harper is engaged to my ex-boyfriend, whom she stole from me just 6 months ago." This triggered a fresh wave of whispers. One of my aunts looked at Harper with disapproval, and the atmosphere in the room grew thick and sticky, like before a thunderstorm. "Leslie, stop it!" Mom shouted, her voice shrill and nervous, the kind it only became when she was losing her footing. "We made a decision as a family. You have a good job, you can afford another place, and Harper needed a place to live with Jake." I felt a wave of anger rise within me and asked, "A family decision? When exactly was I included in this family decision regarding my property?" My father winced and muttered, "We tried calling you—" "Nonsense!" I interrupted him sharply, my voice ringing. "When? Show me one text message, one voicemail, one email where you asked me if Harper could move into my apartment." The room was so silent that I could hear someone awkwardly set a glass down on the table, the clink of glass louder than any words. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, and I immediately saw from their expressions that they realized they'd been caught in a lie, and now no excuses would save them. "We got your messages," Mom muttered, almost breathlessly. "You said yourself that we could take this place. You said it was ours now." I barely held back my laughter and, raising my voice, said so everyone in the room could hear, "Really? Well then, show everyone those messages. Show me where I even once wrote the word give or yours or anything like that." Mom started fiddling with her phone, the screen flickering as if it was deliberately frozen, and I just chuckled. "You know why you won't show me anything? Because those messages don't exist. The only thing you have is my word that you can live here. But living somewhere and owning it are two completely different things, and you know that perfectly well. All this time, Jake stood in the corner as if hoping to blend into the wall, looking so pathetic that for a second I even found it funny. But I decided it was time to shift my attention to him. And you, Jake, tell me honestly, are you okay with this at all? You're living in your ex-girlfriend's apartment. Doesn't that seem weird to you at all? He opened his mouth, his lips trembling, but no sound came out. And then, as if on cue, Harper rushed to his defense, her voice shaking with rage. Jake has every right to be here. This is our home now. I shook my head, feeling anger boiling inside me, and said, "No, Harper, that's not true. And you know what's most offensive? I was trying to help Mom and Dad from the start. I thought they'd finally gotten out of their cramped studio and were living here, starting to breathe freely. But instead, they just gave my kindness to you and moved to an even worse hole." I took out my phone and, hands shaking, opened the photos I'd saved earlier. "Look, everyone." I turned the screen to face my immediate family. "This is where my parents actually live. See? Some tiny rented corner, even worse than where they lived before. They gave up a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment to give it to Harper. And for what?" The room buzzed with voices again. Someone covered their mouth, Mom blushed, and I saw her eyes dart to the floor. "We decided Harper was more important," she stammered. I laughed bitterly, so much so that my voice trembled. "More important? She needs the apartment I pay for every month more than the people I was genuinely trying to help? Do you even realize what you're saying?" And then Dad, suddenly mustering up some kind of resolve, blurted out loudly, "We're going to sue you. You promised us this apartment and we'll make you keep it." His words sounded like a childish threat, and I couldn't help myself. Go ahead, Sue, because I have all the documents proving that the apartment is mine. Here they are. I pulled out a folder and laid the papers out on the table. The title deed, the mortgage, the insurance, the tax returns, all in my name. What do you have? A couple of vague text messages where I said you could live here. By this point, the guests were starting to leave one by one, and I was literally watching Harper's party crumble in real time. And you know what? It was amazing. Finally, she, not me, was the center of shame. Harper stood in the middle of the room, her hands shaking, her face red with anger, and she was practically screaming, "This is my party, Leslie. You're not welcome here." I straightened up, lifted my chin, and replied, "This is my apartment, Harper. And I've never been welcomed so warmly in my life as I have in my own home." I glanced at the remnants of the crowd, 8 people, no more, and their faces showed they were dying to disappear, but didn't know how to do it without looking like cowards. "You know what? The party's over," I said loudly and clearly. "Thank you for coming to say goodbye to the illusion of Harper living in stolen housing, but I think it's time to stop." And at that moment, the last of the guests hurriedly grabbed their purses and coats, muttering awkward goodbyes and studiously avoiding eye contact with me or my parents. When the door slammed behind the last of them, it was just us. Me, Harper, Jake, and my parents. The silence was so thick you could almost hear someone catching their breath. And Harper spoke first. Her voice trembled with rage, and each word struck her like a blow. "Look what you've done. You've ruined everything." I looked at her directly, didn't look away for a second, and said firmly, "I've ruined everything? Harper, you're living in my apartment without my permission. You threw a party for an apartment that doesn't belong to you," I said calmly, though such anger was seething inside me that I thought I might explode. "I didn't ruin anything, Harper. I just told the truth." She crossed her arms over her chest and her eyes narrowed stubbornly, blurted out, "We're not leaving. This is our home now, and you're not kicking us out." I smiled, not because I was amused, but because at that moment I finally felt confident, as if a solid, unshakable foundation had been established within me. "I can actually do this," I said quietly but clearly, "and believe me, I will. The next morning, I met with my old friend Tom, with whom I had once worked at the same firm, now a longtime lawyer with a reputation for handling even the most complex family matters. We sat in a small cafe by the window, drank strong, bitter coffee, and I told him everything. From the moment I first learned about Harper's housewarming to the moment I pushed the last guest out of my own apartment. Tom listened silently, nodding occasionally, and then, when I finished, he simply shook his head. Leslie, legally, it's pretty simple. Right now, they're just squatters. You own the property, you pay the mortgage and taxes. I can file an eviction notice today. I clasped my hands around my cup, as if trying to warm myself up to his words. How much time do I give them? I asked, and he calmly replied, the standard time is 30 days. I'll make it official, send out electronic notices, and there will be a paper trail. A few hours later, Tom sent me copies of the notices, to Harper, to Jake, and just in case, to my parents. 30 days to vacate my apartment. That same evening, I boarded a plane back to the city where I now lived and worked, and for the first time in months, I felt relief. It felt like I was holding the threads of my life in my hands again, rather than watching from the sidelines as someone else yanked them apart. But the peace didn't last long. Within a couple of days, my phone started ringing off the hook. First, my mom wrote long, guilt-ridden messages. Leslie, please, we have to talk. You're tearing our family apart. We raised you better. Then came my dad's words. How can you be so cruel to your own parents? They called day and night, left voicemails, but I ignored them all. They had 6 months to include me in discussions about my apartment, but they hadn't, and now they would have to reap the consequences of their decisions. A couple of weeks later, Tom called. His voice was calm, but with a slight smirk. I heard the news from a colleague today. Your parents hired a lawyer and are trying to sue you for breaking a promise or some other nonsense. I took a deep breath and said, so should I be worried? Not at all, he replied. I met with their lawyer and your parents yesterday. They claim you promised to give them the apartment back and that they renovated it, meaning they deserve to keep it. But it was a disaster for them. Their lawyer couldn't provide a single piece of evidence to support your promise. And when I pulled out the receipts and reminded them that you'd been paying the mortgage and taxes all this time, their case simply fell apart. I remained silent, listening as Tom continued. Your mom had a complete breakdown right there at the meeting. She cried, accused you of ingratitude, said they were getting old, they had nowhere else to go, and they deserved this apartment, if only because they were getting older. And then, choking with tears, she begged to at least let them live there without Harper and Jake. But I told her the decision had been made. 30 days. No exceptions. I hung up and sat for a long time in the silence of my apartment in a new city. Yes, I felt a little sorry for my parents. I knew that, to some extent, Harper had skillfully manipulated them, pushing them toward a decision that only benefited her. But in the end, they made the choice themselves. They could have called me, asked my opinion, at least tried to engage me in conversation before handing over my property to the woman who had betrayed me in the most cruel way. But instead, they sided with her and essentially turned a blind eye to my pain, and now the consequences were inevitable. A month later, Tom called, and his voice, calm as ever, conveyed the words I'd been waiting for, as if I'd been holding my breath all this time. They're gone. Harper and Jake finished moving their things this morning. Your parents helped them load the truck. I saw them leave. I was there to make sure it was truly over. Harper cried the whole time, cursed your name, made a scene, very dramatic, like a traveling theater. I listened to him and felt something inside finally release, like a stone that had been pressing on my chest, slowly sliding down and disappearing. I realized I needed to return there again, to close the chapter myself, to look at the apartment and decide what to do with it. That weekend, I got on a plane again, flew in, and met Tom right outside the building where a part of my life had been inscribed for so many years. When we walked inside, we were greeted by emptiness, but not the pure emptiness that brings relief, but a dirty emptiness, saturated with malice and disrespect. They'd left holes in the walls where pictures had been, the carpets were stained, and several lamps I'd once bought myself were simply gone. Tom shook his head as he walked through the rooms. Gorgeous. That's how they showed their maturity, but I barely listened. Standing in the middle of this empty apartment, I felt not anger, not sadness, but clarity. I didn't want to be here anymore, not for a minute. Every wall, every corner was tainted with memories of betrayal, deception, and pain. I turned to Tom and said quietly but confidently, I want to sell it. I'm not coming back to live here, and I don't want to be a landlord from afar. I want to end this chapter. He nodded, and a week later, we put the apartment on the market. Everything happened so quickly, as if life itself was rushing to help me. In less than a month, a buyer was found, and the deal was closed. The proceeds from the sale became a great down payment on a beautiful apartment in my new city, a place that was truly mine and free of family drama. I only heard about my parents and Harper occasionally. Someone from distant relatives would tell me the news, as if trying to subtly check if I had any regrets. They said my parents had moved back to a small rented apartment, and Harper and Jake had found cramped quarters on the other side of town. Judging by the stories, they're still angry and love to complain to everyone about how cruel I was to them. A few months ago, my cousin Lisa called. Leslie, I just wanted to let you know that Harper's been writing on Facebook about how you ruined her dream of owning a home, calling you a traitor. What do you think about that? I just chuckled. I think she's delusional. I helped my parents out of kindness, and they decided to betray me for her. Anyone with a shred of common sense understands that. A year has passed since the apartment was sold, and I haven't regretted my decision for a second. I love my new place, where every single thing was chosen by me and reminds me not of someone else's whims, but of my strength. I love my work, and I love the way my life is now, free from constant manipulation, drama, and omissions. Sometimes people ask me if I miss my relationship with my parents or Harper, and I answer honestly, no. They showed me their true colors when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Harper was always jealous and manipulative, and my parents always took the easy way out, even if it meant betraying their other daughter. These aren't the kind of people I want to keep around. Here in my new city, I've created a new family for myself, friends who respect me, colleagues who appreciate my work, and I know that one day I'll meet someone who won't fall for my sister's cheap games. Sometimes I wonder if Harper and Jake are still together. Part of me is convinced their whole love affair was just a desire to beat me in some ridiculous race. And now that the game is over and the cards are on the table, they might have nothing left. But you know what? That's not my problem anymore.